Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how to Dockerize a React application for both development and production. We'll also optimize our production build using Nginx and some Docker best practices like build a pattern and multi-stage builds. Let's get started. I've initialized a pretty standard React project using create React app. I'm going to close this now and clear the terminal. Let's create a Docker file. So I'm going to do touch Docker file. Now let's add some content to our Docker file, and I'm gonna try my best to explain every step. So from node 14 Alpine, so I like to use node Alpine as my base image as they're quite light, but if your project uses tons of native libraries, you might face some issues with Alpine. Let's define our env, node env development. I'm also going to add a work directory, which would be app. Let's copy our package.json and also our yarn lock to our working directory. Let's install our dependencies and then copy all the source code files. So this sequence of commands might look very strange at first. So we are copying our package.json, then yarn lock, then doing dependency install, and then copying all the source code files. So why not replace these steps with just copying our source files and doing dependency install? Sure, we can do that, but then Docker won't be able to cache our builds. And that's going to be a total game changer when we are rebuilding our images multiple times on the CI. Now I'm going to expose port 3000, expose 3000. And finally, we'll start our app. So yarn start. Perfect. Now let's create a Docker ignore file. Touch.docker ignore. And this will help us ignore some files that we don't want to copy to our Docker container. I'm going to add node modules and also a build folder. Now I'm going to create a Docker compose file. So I'm going to do touch docker compose.dev.yaml. This is a configuration file for Docker Compose, and this will help us define our services and run them. I'm going to start by specifying a version. So let's do 3.8. Now defining our services. I'm going to say app, specify a container name. Let's say app dev, image name, app dev, specify some build argument, target, development. We'll also make use of volumes, which will help us sync our host and containers. Volumes. I'm going to mount our source folder, so src with app src. Now let's expose and bind some ports. So ports, let's bind 3000 with 3000. Awesome. We are done with our Docker compose file. As a last step, I'll go to our Dockerfile and tag this as development, because we specified our target as development here. Perfect. Let's start a container. Let's go to terminal and do docker compose, specify our file, and say up. Let's wait for it. Perfect. Let's check out our app. So I'm going to go to localhost 3000, localhost 3000, and our app is running. Let's try to change some content and see if it refreshes. So let's go to app.js and say, hey, let's go back to our app and we can see our hey. You can also open Docker Desktop to see the images you built and the containers that are running. So as we can see, we are running the app.dev container. Let's go back, cancel this. Let's also quickly see how Docker built the image. I'm going to scroll up. We can see it cached this step, and if we run a Docker build again, it will also cache these steps, saving us like 55 seconds right now. So as you can imagine, on bigger projects, this saves tons of time and improves our dev experience. So we're done with setting up our dev environment with Docker. Now we'll take a look at how to set up and optimize our production workflow. So I'm going to clear this and close these files. Great. Now let's start with our production setup. So I'm going to go back to the Dockerfile and we'll define some steps for the production as well. Before we start writing our Dockerfile, let's check out one thing. Docker images. This command will list all the Docker images we either built or pulled. So as you can see, we recently built app.dev, which is like huge, over 400 MB. And this is after we used Node Alpine, which is one of the smallest base images available. Now we'll see how to optimize and reduce this image size using builder pattern. If you're not familiar with the builder pattern, it's basically splitting our build process in multiple stages. So we can build our assets or binary in one stage and then copy them over to another image or stage. The final base image that we use is usually Alpine, which is quite small, but here we'll use Nginx as it's great for serving static assets. Let's start by defining our builder. So from node 14 Alpine, but this time this is a builder, and define our env, node env, this time production. Let's define a work directory, app, copy our package.json, and also copy our lock. Let's install, but this time for production. Copy our source code files, and finally run yarn build. Great. So this is our builder. It takes our code, installs all the dependencies, and builds it in production mode. Perfect. Now let's define a production target. So this time I'm going to use Nginx. So from Nginx, we'll use 1.21.0, again Alpine to reduce our image size, and I'm going to tag this as production. So here's the cool thing about the builder pattern. So I'm going to copy our assets from the builder like this. From builder, let's copy our build directory to user share Nginx HTML. Let's also copy our Nginx config, which we'll define in a minute, to Nginx conf d default.conf. Finally, let's expose port 80 and start our Nginx server. Perfect. Now let's define our Nginx configuration. So I'm going to create a nginx.conf file. If you're not familiar with Nginx, it's an amazing tool. Basically, it's a web server that can be used as a reverse proxy, load balancer, and much more. And I would recommend this over something like Serve, as Nginx is much more performant and versatile. Let's go back to our code. So I'm going to do server, listen on port 80, on location, use root as user, share Nginx HTML. I'll also include our MIME types, include, let's see, Nginx mime.types, and we'll try our index.html against the URI. So try files, Perfect. So we just defined a very simple Nginx configuration. Right now, we'll just use port 80 as we don't have any certificates to use SSL right now. Let's clear the terminal and finally create our Docker Compose file for production. Docker compose.prod.yaml. And this is going to be very similar to our Docker Compose dev file. So let's quickly type it out. Before we build this, let's quickly compare this to our Docker Compose dev file. So I'm going to open our Docker Compose dev file. As you can see, in production, we are not defining any volumes as we won't be doing any code changes like development, and we won't be defining our ports as well. Personally, I do not recommend using Docker Compose in production as it's not a container orchestrator. It's recommended to use something like Kubernetes, AWS ECS, or others. I'm going to close this. So I'm going to go to the terminal and do Docker Compose build on file, Docker Compose, prod, YAML, build. Perfect, we're done building. Let's check out a production image using Docker images command. Docker images. And this is the amazing part. As you can see, we reduced our image size from over 400 megabytes to just 23 MB. And now you can upload this tiny production image to any container repository you like, such as Docker Hub or AWS ECR. At last, I'm going to clear this and use Docker run to run our production image. So Docker run bind port 80 to port 80 with name React app and app prod is our image. Let's check our browser. So I'm going to go to localhost and we can see our container is running in production mode. Amazing. With Nginx, we'll also get some audit logs, and this is great for visibility. As Nginx is really versatile, you can go to your Nginx conf and add some additional rules to optimize your static assets. Wrapping up, I'll add some comments to the Dockerfile and commit everything to this repository with all the links in the description below. This is it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.